Are you seeing the presentation?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. To begin, so as I mentioned, I work for U.S. Wind, and some background on our project. We won the rights to a lease area, offshore lease area, that comes as far north as the Fenwick Island latitudes, but then essentially extends down the coast of Ocean City. At its closest point, it's 12 miles from the coast. At its furthest, it's 26. A lot of people, I think, are aware of Orsted's lease area, which is north of ours, pretty much runs down the Delaware coast. It's also referred to as Skipjack. We have this southern lease area here. There are 80,000 miles in this lease area, and the whole area can support about 1,800 megawatts of energy. Now, having the rights to a lease area is great, but nobody builds these things on spec. You have to wait for someone to tell you that they're going to buy your energy if you were to produce it. And that happened first in 2017 when the Maryland Public Service Commission had a competitive process to award offshore renewable energy certificates, also known as ORECs. And what these do is they effectively set the future price of energy that will be paid. So a lot of things are considered in this process, but it's essentially lowest cost is likely going to win, and that's part of how the cost of offshore wind gets competed down. And by having that certainty, that price certainty, there's still, of course, some risk about whether we'll be successful in completing the project. But if we are successful, we know what our cash flows are going to look like, and that certainty allows investment capital to come in to finance these very expensive projects and allows us to get going. So we won the right to develop 270 megawatts worth of offshore wind energy in 2017, and we got to work on that. In 2021, the Maryland PSC had a second round of auctions for offshore renewable energy certificates, and we won 808 megawatts there. Now, if you're interested, just prior to 2014, before this became a lease area, BOEM, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, part of the Department of the Interior, began by establishing a call area that was roughly twice the size of the lease area. It extended much further to the east. And a call area is an area where they believe that it's likely that there are some good areas here for developing of wind energy, but we want to go through a public process, and it took about 4 years where they evaluate environmental concerns to make sure that there are no critical habitats in that broader space for threatened or endangered species. And then they do a long stakeholder conflict avoidance process. And they wound up removing, you can kind of envision it here, there's a major shipping channel, and you guys probably see the cargo ships that come in and out of the Delaware Bay that they run right through here. So obviously you don't want to have a bunch of turbines sitting here, so that area was removed. And then there's actually a very valuable scallop commercial fishery further east here. So the area that stretched out to the east was removed. This is the area that remained. They established that as a lease area. We won that in the competitive bidding process. And now having that 1,100 megawatts is enough energy to power about 380,000 homes in the area. And we're able to produce that with about 76 turbines and 3 offshore substations. And if nothing else changes, this is the array that we would use to lay out those turbines and offshore substations. Each one of these turbines is roughly a nautical mile apart. And the closest turbine to these sites in Delaware is about 15 miles to Fenwick Island, 17 to Bethany, 24 to Dewey. And we have an actual official marathon. It's 26.2 miles to Rehoboth. From Fenwick anyway, still 50% of the turbines in the view should be beyond 19 miles. So there's still some decent distance there. If you recall, the shape of the lease area goes a little bit further north and a little bit further east. So there is about 700 megawatts of capacity left. So if Delaware were to create a procurement program and wanted us to bid on it, we certainly would. But right now, this is what we have the ability to build, and this is what we're working on. So Maryland established the OREC award that gave us the ability to bring in financing. And the Maryland ratepayers are the folks that will be paying for this energy. So why does Delaware matter? And there are a number of reasons why Delaware matters, but the first and foremost reason is that we're going to connect to the grid, make landfall and connect to the grid in Delaware. And the reason for this is that all of the substations south of the Maryland-Delaware border are too small to bring the amount of energy on board that we will be bringing. They are at best 138 kilovolt substations. And as it turns out, Sussex County has three 230 kilovolt substations, Indian River near the power plant there, Cool Spring and Milford, that do have the capacity to accept the amount of energy we would be bringing on board. The grid itself is also much stronger. It gets progressively weaker as you head south from Wilmington, so it's a little bit stronger in Sussex County as well. We've not yet determined where we would recommend making landfall and which of these three substations we would ultimately connect to, and therefore which path between those we would take. We're doing a lot of analysis. We're very close to finishing that up, and so you'll see a proposal come out this year. But the basic standards that we will follow is, first, this will be guided by science and the surveying that we're doing. And we want to find the least disruptive route for human systems, for folks in the area, as well as for the natural ecosystems in the area. And the second really important component is that wherever we wind up going, the cables that connect to the grid are going to be buried where they initiate at the offshore wind area off the coast here, from where they ultimately connect to an existing substation. And specifically, they'll be buried about 6 feet under the seabed until we get to about 1,000 feet off the coast. And at that point, we'll switch to something called horizontal directional drilling, which allows us to go about 60 feet under the dune, under the beach, under the dune, so we don't disturb those two critical habitats. It also ensures that the cables will not become unburied over time, so we're going to be very, very deep. And then we'll come up on the other side of the dune, and at that point, it's just like any other buried utility, making a connection out to an existing substation. Again, we'll be buried about 6 feet beneath the ground there. You may have heard, we've done a lot of geophysical and geotechnical surveying of the lease area and of potential export cable paths, but right now, there's a lot of nearshore survey work going on that's been in the news. And so you may have even seen some vessels along the coast, really in front of the state beaches from Tower Road down to 3Rs. And they're just mapping the ocean floor to see what it looks like there, to understand, again, where we should go, if there are any coral structures or boats or anything like that we have to avoid, any, again, critical areas for vegetation, things like that, just getting a good lay of the land. This is just a really quick overview of the entire offshore wind development process so that you know what's coming next. This is the standard for all offshore development in the United States. So this area here represents that 4-year period where BOEM started with a call area and winnowed it down to the eventual lease area. We won that in an auction. The first thing we had to do was put together a site assessment plan and have that approved by BOEM. That is our plan for how we will learn everything that we need to know about the environment, the ecosystem of the lease area and potential export cable paths to be able to develop this project safely and responsibly. That was approved in 2018, and at that point, we got started on the development of our construction and operations plan. This is a over 1,000-page document that lays out in excruciating detail every single detail about the project, from the design and of the components that we'll be using, manufacturing, transport, the installation of those components in the lease area, maintenance and operations of those components over time, and then ultimately decommissioning of those components. Just to take a quick sidebar, everything is built to last a minimum of 25 years, but there's no reason that with proper maintenance it can't last significantly longer than that. But at some point in time, it's anticipated that the wind farm will be beyond its useful life, beyond its efficiently useful life. When that happens, we are required, per our lease with BOEM, to remove every part of the infrastructure we put in. So nothing stays out there and decays. we take it all out. So that's the turbines, the foundations, the cabling, the scour protection that's put around the foundation of the cables. If federal and state authorities would like us to keep it there because it's become positive habitat for local fish, and we would leave that there. But if folks would rather have that removed, we would take that out as well. We have to set aside money now and make assurances so that regardless of what happens to U.S. wind over time, the money exists to be able to remove those components. We expect to hear from BOEM within weeks that this construction operations plan has been deemed sufficient and complete. At that point, they'll give us a notice of intent that we're going to be beginning a National Environmental Protection Act process. That's a public process where all of the details in that plan are assessed against every federal environmental law that exists. So that's clean air, clean water, Coastal Zone Management Act, Magnuson-Stevens Fishery, Marine Mammal Protection Act, Migratory Birds, et cetera, and any relevant Delaware state laws based upon what we might be doing in state. And there's opportunity for public comment throughout this period. The other thing that happens is our COP, that 1,000-page document, becomes a public document. And I encourage everybody to take a look at that. Everything you could possibly want to know about the project is included therein. And I think there's a really good story to tell. It also lays out, I should mention, it identifies all of the risks that we will create through our activities, and more importantly, how we will mitigate those risks. And that's really what is being assessed through that NEPA process. And at the end of that process, if we pass all of those tests, we'll get the green light to begin offshore construction. So it looks like right now, that will begin sometime in 2024. If all goes well, we expect to complete the first 270 megawatts in 2025. And then we would just continue to go from there and deliver the next 808 megawatts in 2026, possibly 2027. Real quickly, as I mentioned, Maryland is paying for the energy. So they were able to stipulate a number of benefits that we need to deliver for the state of Maryland. So between us and Ørsted, we have to deliver 10,000 jobs in the state of Maryland, and we're doing that principally through establishing manufacturing facilities there. So we've taken over the decade-shuttered old Bethlehem steel plant at Sparrows Point. We're building that out to be able to build turbine foundations that we will develop for our project and any others. So that is 3,500 jobs doing construction, refitting that plant, and then 600 permanent union steelworker jobs building those monopile foundations for as long as offshore wind is a thing, which will hopefully be a long, long time. But everything that we don't have to do in Maryland, we want to do here in Delaware. So that lays out a number of different benefits. Some benefits that just come with the fact that we're going to be connecting to the grid here. So 1,100 megawatts of clean energy is going to be coming into the grid in Delaware. And how energy is billed versus where those electrons are actually consumed are two very different things. And the way that physics works, those electrons tend to be consumed close to where they are delivered. So the reality is that Delaware, and in large part, much of Delaware's energy need is going to be met by these green electrons. Delaware just won't be able to take credit for those electrons against its state renewable energy portfolio, but they do get to be used here. And I mentioned the grid is stronger here, but we are still going to have to invest several $100 million in strengthening the grid. That becomes better capacity for the folks that live here, more reliable system as we grow the area. It also has lots of jobs in terms of doing that work, building out the grid, and there'll be construction jobs related to burying our cables as well. We've made some investments in like-missioned organizations and things that, U.S. Wind is going to be here for another 40, 45 years, and we want to be good corporate citizens. So we made a $100,000 contribution to the Center for the Inland Bays education facility at the James Farm Nature Preserve. I mean, it's a fortunate thing. I know the great work that the center does. So as we were looking for opportunities to invest in strong local organizations, I was able to point out, hey, there's a great group right here. Very proud to be able to do that. We've made an investment in Delaware Prosperity Partnership, which is a job incubator, a company incubator that try to draw companies to Delaware and help them grow here to build employment and career opportunities for Delawareans. We're also beginning discussions with the coastal towns, the 7 coastal towns, through the Association of Coastal Towns. We've let them know that we recognize that we're going to produce some changes for them, and you know, there should be some benefits associated with that. We're happy to figure out what would be meaningful to them in this situation. And then there'll be some other opportunities that'll come up. I mentioned there are also supply chain opportunities here. So again, whatever we can't do in Maryland, we'll do here. We've been in touch with Gillespie Precast Concrete to build vaults for the cables, Crystal Steel to do secondary steel work and on-site development. There's a lot of earth moving that can take place, as well as surveying and survey support. And we'll look for other opportunities in that area. And then we're trying to incubate ourselves and help along opportunities that are now fruitful because the offshore wind industry is nearby. One of which is an opportunity to work with the University of Delaware and Del Tech. They want to build out an offshore wind training center for essentially the operations and maintenance sorts of jobs. This is a job training program for Delawareans, as well as a tourism opportunity for folks from other countries and other areas that might come in and get their training here. And we'd like to help that along and then use those services when they're available and things like that. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts. I'll also mention here real quickly before we get into questions, on May 20th, the Fenwick Island Town Council is holding an offshore wind symposium at Indian River High School. The doors will open at 5:30. I've just gotten the agenda. I'm going to have 7.5 minutes to speak. Orsted will have 7.5 minutes to speak. And then there's an hour-long program with several folks that are essentially anti-offshore wind activists in one shape or form. So we would love to have as many offshore wind supporters as we possibly could get out there to help make it a good event. With that, I will unshare my screen.
Thank you. You might perhaps just leave that up just for a moment so that everybody who has a chance, and you may talk about that a little more. So thank you so much. That was very informative and to the point. So I appreciate that. Anybody have any questions for Mike?
Yes, Mike.
Go ahead.
Okay, I got a bunch of little questions. So when people get tired of hearing my questions, raise your hand and I'll shut up. First of all, a comment about the aesthetics. I actually think the wind turbines are very attractive. And I don't mind that they're visible, especially from the tops of somebody's high rise out at the beach, but what the heck. Anyway, one of the things I've always wondered about, you sort of addressed it, is when these wind turbines are decommissioned, I was thinking, gee, that would be a great place for an offshore condo. But if you got to take them out, you got to take them out. But I just was picturing that as an appealing thing. Now, one of the questions that I'm sure others have asked is, if the Delaware substations are going to need to be strengthened, whichever one or ones you choose to use, why can't the Ocean City substations be strengthened as an alternative?
It gets into that 138 kilovolts versus 230 kilovolts. So we will, wherever we land, we will build a couple substations adjacent to the substation we ultimately connect. But that substation that we ultimately connect to we'll be bringing 230 kilovolt cables in, connecting to a 230 kilovolt substation that we create that will need to connect to another 230 kilovolt substation. So, I mean, in theory, you could, but it would be a much longer term investment. You'd have to, kind of build from scratch the ability to connect up to the grid at a 230 kilovolt level. I'm not an electrical engineer, so that's a 10,000 foot understanding, but that's the essence of it.
Okay. the just a geeky question that I have is, what kinds of foundations will be under these turbines? Are they going to be like driven piles or suction caissons, or what's expected in this environment?
I am really impressed with your knowledge and terminology there, Mike. Good job. We'll be using steel monopile foundations for everything except possibly jacket foundations for the offshore substations. And we'll have 3 to 4 offshore substations. And what happens is, the energy begins as pulsing energy. The offshore substation streamlines it into consistent energy so it can be transmitted to the landfall and connection to the grid. Gets to a 230 kilovolt substation where it's stepped down to a safe level to reach to someone's home. But the majority of what's going to be out there, all of the turbines will be monopile foundations. And the way that they are installed is through a pile driving facility. And if I can anticipate another question that would come off of this, one of the big concerns, one of the risks is really to marine mammals with the sound that comes from that pile driving activity. It is quite loud and it can be harmful to those animals. And so we go through a pretty extreme set of mitigation processes to make sure that we're going to do no harm in that area, beginning with all of the vessels that go out there will have a NOAA certified observer on board, and that NOAA certified observer has to make sure, and he will verify that the area is clear, the construction area is clear of all marine mammals for a full 60 minutes before anything can begin. And if at any point in the process, a marine mammal wanders into the exclusion zone, everything has to stop. You have to clear for 60 minutes before you can begin again. The second thing, well, I should say the first thing is we will do the work counter-cyclically to the time when marine mammals are most likely to be there. Second thing is clearing the area. Third thing is that we start with what's called a soft start, where we're really just tapping the monopile, and it's at a non-harmful level, but loud enough so that animals that have cleared that exclusion zone but are still close enough to hear it behaviorally will move away further. And we do that for 30 minutes to give those animals plenty of time to get away. Then as we actually begin the pile driving itself, we use sound attenuation technologies like double bubble curtains and physical sheaths that reduce the sound another 20 decibels. We can only put in 1 monopile per day. So you're not going to have the combined effect of multiple monopiles going on. Once we're done with one, we can't move on to another. It's just 1 per day. So again, you're not stressing the environment. And if there are environmental conditions that make it impossible to do any of these things, including observation, say it's a misty day, there's bad visibility, then we can't do it. So the intent here is to recognize that there is risk, do everything that we possibly can to make sure that we don't create a problem.
Tom has his hand up. Thanks, Mike. Both mics.
You can't see me. I want to put my hand up too.
Oh, okay. I can see you and I can see Al. So let's do Tom, then Doris, and then Al. Go ahead, Tom.
Okay, thank you. Just one question, Mike, and this just brings it into a comparison. Speaking of 1 wind turbine, what is the equivalent to a solar panel as far as output is concerned? And you can, I don't know if you have a comparison or can add something to that, but
yeah, I'm gonna take a note here. I actually have never been asked that question. I don't know the answer, but I'll find out and I'll get it back to Claire so that she can put it out here. I know that, so we're still evaluating turbines, but what is almost certain is that we're going to be going with a GE Haliad X 14.7 megawatt turbine. So each turbine is capable of delivering 14.7 megawatts. And that in and of itself is larger than most community solar fields. I know that we need large tracts of land to be able to get to utility scale solar. Like I said, I don't know the specifics, but I know that that's one of the limitations. And as we look at this area, there are areas in the desert in Nevada and California and in the Midwest, where you've got inexpensive areas of land that get lots of sun, where you really, the best thing to do is develop utility level scale solar. We don't have that here, and we also don't have, really good landscapes for onshore wind. What we do have as a resource is very consistent wind offshore. And so this is for Delaware, for Maryland, for states in this area, this is kind of our best form of renewable energy. We should still do all the rooftop solar, all the geothermal that we possibly can. I believe that for the situation that we're in vis-a-vis climate change and sea level rise, we need every possible solution to be applied to its full extent. But it's a challenge based upon the amount of land you need to get to utility scale solar here. But I'll get that answer for you, and I'll get that back to Claire so we can get something specific.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Doris, go ahead.
I apologize, Mike, because this question was asked at the meeting on Saturday, but there were parts of it that I didn't understand, wasn't clear. The 76 wind turbines that will be built off of the Ocean City, Maryland coastline will generate 1,100 megawatts of electricity that will be delivered to 380,000 Maryland homes through underground cables attached to the grid by way of Delaware substations. This will result in Maryland receiving significant federal renewable energy credits. Meanwhile, Delaware will have to spend Delaware tax dollars to buy federal renewable energy credits, as Delaware will not be getting any renewable energy credits from the energy running through Delaware to power Maryland homes. Can you explain all of this renewable tax credits, and is Delaware just being used? I have a problem with that.
Yeah, so that statement is almost entirely correct. The piece of it that's not quite right is that the energy that connects in Delaware doesn't flow. There's nothing directing it to Maryland homes. That actual energy in large measure will be consumed here in Delaware. It'll flow down to Ocean City as well. It may flow as far as DC, Pennsylvania, things like that. But again, those laws of physics, a lot of it, if not the lion's share of it, will be consumed here in Delaware. But you're right, because Maryland is paying for it, they get to claim the credit against their legislatively imposed state renewable energy standard. And I think that's 50% of their energy has to come from renewable sources and 10% needs to come from offshore wind. Delaware does not have a procurement program yet for offshore wind. So Delaware also has a state renewable energy standard. I think it's 40% by 2030. I might be wrong. And right now they're getting to that through the one wind turbine in Lewis, which I can see from my home, as all the community solar that exists in the area, and some other minor things like that. But the Center for SIOW, the Institute for Offshore Wind, recently put out a recommendation that Delaware start a procurement program for offshore wind. They pointed out how the cost of wind energy has gone down significantly. So, for example, those 1,100 megawatts that we're delivering, the cost to the average Maryland ratepayer will be $1.85 a month. And that's fixed for 20 years. So, it's not what it was in the past where, those charges would have been $10, $15, per month per user. The other thing is that recommendation showed that Delaware is going to have a lot of difficulty meeting its state imposed renewable energy standard without an offshore wind program. So the way that states can meet those requirements is they can develop their own renewable energy. And again, Delaware is doing this with solar. Or if they don't have enough megawatts of energy that they're creating, then they can buy renewable energy credits from other states that have a surplus of these credits. And there's a point in time where the cost of buying those credits will be more than the cost to invest in developing certain renewable energies. And that's one of the points that that recommendation makes, is that the state really should look at doing this, because for a lot of reasons it makes sense. I do want to touch on the, is Delaware being used in this situation? I live here too, and I certainly wouldn't be a part of this if I thought that was the case. Recall that, at first note, you'll get that clean energy. So when you're, running your refrigerator or your air conditioning in the summer, you're going to be doing so in a few years with clean energy. Delaware doesn't get to take credit for it, but you're using clean energy. The other thing is, literally hundreds of millions of dollars are going to be invested in the state infrastructure. Everyone here is going to benefit from that, just from the infrastructure itself, as well as the jobs that that's going to create. And then, there are other industry related investments that we want to make that should help the economy over time. I think that that's Delaware getting an awful lot out of this whole thing. And at the end of the day, when we're all done, all the cables are going to be buried. The only indication you'll have that there's anything there is the occasional manhole cover. So there is some disruption of activities while the construction is going on. But once that's all done, everything is essentially as it always was. And in exchange for a period of disruption, there's going to be significant investment in the infrastructure in Delaware, into towns in Delaware, into jobs and industry in Delaware.
Thank you. Al, you were next, and then Linda.
Okay, Mr. Mike, thank you. I just have one quick question. And that question is, this symposium, is there any chance that it will not only be in person, but be in Zoom?
I know that a couple of the speakers are Zooming in. So I would think that that's going to be the case. What I don't know for sure is that a Zoom that exists just to bring the speaker into the room, or is it a Zoom broadcast of the entire event? It's probably the latter. But I haven't, the organizers are keeping everything fairly close to the vest, so there's not a whole lot that I know.
Okay.
But if there is a Zoom link that you can attend, again, I'll push that out to Claire so that she can send it to you guys.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Linda, then Dolores, and then Liz.
So my question was, when are you going to start? How long does it take from start to finish everything?
So I guess, Linda, the key thing in that answer is, how do we define start? Because there's been survey work and scientific study going on since 2014 when we acquired.
Right. I guess
the
I meant
wind
with
energy
the
area.
construction part.
Yeah. So we've got to get through. Well, the construction operations plan has to be deemed sufficient and complete. I really believe that's going to happen by June. At that point, we have that 2-year NEPA process, and that's a public process where there will be opportunities to provide written and in-person statements, your own views on things, any concerns you may have. But assuming that goes according to schedule, that means we'll begin construction in 2024.
2024.
And we would expect it's not that the offshore construction would be constant. We'll be doing it, like I say, counter-cyclically to marine mammal migration patterns, to fish spawning patterns, to things like that. So it'll be a couple months here, a couple months there, but we would expect to get 1,100 megawatts in between 2024 and 2026.
And where are you going to have your staging? Ocean City, Indian River Marina, or?
I'm sorry,
Your staging for the boats. To bring the stuff out.
Staging. Yeah, so the operations and maintenance facility is likely going to come out of Ocean City. That's one of the things that, per Maryland issuing the OREX, they stipulated that. We're still negotiating on some land there, so there's an outside chance it could wind up being elsewhere. But in all likelihood, that's Ocean City.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Liz?
Thank you for your presentation. I really have learned a lot tonight. My question is, and this is a memory that came from a former member of the 38th, Barry. I'm concerned about how the electricity is going to be flowing from the substation through Route 1 to all these people that are getting the electricity. Are we going to have to do something to change how the, I don't know what they're called, but how the electric flows? Are we going to have to build, are you going to have to build things to send more electricity down the wire? How's that going to work, and how's that going to affect the Route 1 corridor?
Sure, that's a great question. So let me answer that from two perspectives. The first being that other than the infrastructure that we put up around the existing substation where we're ultimately going to connect, everything will be underground. There'll be no visible infrastructure from the offshore wind farm itself to that substation that we connect to. The cables themselves that are being used to transmit the energy are actually way safer than the overhead cables that we have all over the county right now, because they are insulated, sheathed, and then armored to prevent any electric current from escaping. So they're actually, you know, as we walk around, every single cable that transmits electricity, even the cable, you know, the cord to your toaster, creates an electromagnetic field. But unlike these other transmission wires, we have all that insulation around it protecting it. So there's no potential impact on human beings, on human systems, on human beings. And as we come under the beach and the dune, remember, we're going to be 60 feet under the ground. And there's going to be nothing flowing up into the sand from that deep. Now, offshore, we're going to be buried 6 feet deep. And the electromagnetic field that does emanate from these cables would be perceptible within a meter or two of where that cable is. So then we look at, well, how will that affect the animals that live out there, marine ecosystems? And we've got 30 years of history of offshore wind in Europe, and we also have submarine cables being used in different ways here. And so a lot of work has been done around this. And so far, very little impact has been noted. There have been field studies that have shown slight behavioral differences for lobsters and skates around submarine cables. I forget which one it is. One of them tends to congregate a little bit more nearer to the cables. One of them tends to be a little bit further away relative to how they proceeded around their habitat prior to that. But none of that behavior was such that it prevented any normal flow of activity crossing those lines or anything like that. A number of lab studies have also been done. Not all, but some fish are magnetosensitive or electrosensitive. Those animals that are typically either able to pick up on the Earth's magnetic field, which is 0 hertz, and they use that for navigation, or the electromagnetic fields that are created by different animals. So we all do this as we move around, and those are between 0 and 10 hertz. So think about that's really kind of predator-prey relationships. How do you detect another being there? Those animals that are electro or magnetosensitive have not been shown in any lab tests to be reactive to the 60 hertz EMF that comes from a submarine cable like what we'll be using. If you think about it like a radio station, they simply have not evolved to pick up that channel. So in the lab tests that they do, they are not reactive to that particular frequency. So we would expect any impact to be negligible to 0 from those submarine cables. Studies have been done. We will continue to study this, you know, throughout the life of our wind farm, and that'll be public information that we would share to extend the knowledge in this area. But again, you know, 30 years of observation in Europe and the lab experimentation that's going on, it appears to be a non-issue.
All right. Well, thank you again. And we do have a request from Dolores. Mike, could you put your contact information in the chat?
Yeah.
That would be awesome.
Sure.
Thank you. And I'm sure that everyone here joins me in thanking you so much for sharing this information and for all the work that you've been doing. We know that it's definitely a change, and a lot of times people aren't too helpful with change, but it's something that we absolutely have to start moving towards. So we really do appreciate that. And we will get the word out. I'm sure Mike will continue to put it in our weekly updates and on the webpage. You got it, Dolores?
Yes.
In the checked and Dolores. Okay, awesome.
Yep.
All right.
And I thank you guys very much for the time. That's my number and my email. Any questions you have, if you'd like to have a more detailed conversation, whatever you need, I'm here for you. Just give me a shout and we'll figure something out. I thank you very much.